everyone! Today we're going to be making an all butter pie crust. So I know some people are scared of making their own pie crust, but I'm going to show you every step that I use to get that really flaky texture that a lot of people like in American pie crusts. So there are three things that you should keep in mind when making a pie crust just to start off. The first thing is that you want to keep your ingredients really cold. Second thing is that we want to handle the dough as little as possible. Because our body temperature is really high, we can melt the butter, which we don't want. And the third thing is that we can use special ingredients to help maintain that flaky texture when we bake it. So I'm going to walk you through all of that as well as storing pie crust. So this is a frozen pie crust that I keep in my freezer at all times for pie emergencies. And I will go through how I store and keep my pie crust for a long period of time.
Alright, today we are making a double crust. The full written recipe with the ingredient amounts will be on my blog, Tasty Pastry Kitchen. To a very large mixing bowl, add your all-purpose or pastry flour, kosher salt, sugar, and baking powder. Give that a good whisk for at least 30 seconds to mix all the ingredients together. Add in your cold unsalted butter. I usually cut mine into cubes and stick it into the freezer for about 5 minutes. Then you're going to want to cut the butter into the flour. So you can use butter knives like I showed you and just use 2 of them and kind of slice them into the dough. That's going to take a little bit longer, but if that's all you have, it works great. If you can get your hands on a pastry cutter like this right here, it actually just makes this cutting into the flour more efficient. They're not that expensive, and I use mine all the time for making all kinds of doughs like biscuit doughs and things like that. So all you have to do is take your pastry cutter and push it down into the flour, cutting the butter, and you want to keep doing this, pressing up against the sides of the bowl until the butter is about the size of a small pea. Now the temperature of your hands will melt the butter, so I tend to err on the side of touching the dough as little as possible during this process. At some point at the end of this cutting though, you're going to have to reach down and feel the dough. It's going to feel very dry, and you're going to see butter that's been cut into different sizes. So it doesn't matter how small they are, as long as the biggest ones that you see are no larger than a small pea, then it's ready to move on to the next step. You're going to need some ice cold water and apple cider vinegar. So the vinegar acts to also inhibit gluten formation, and it's kind of a secret ingredient. Some people use vodka, you can do that, or you can just use straight up just ice water if you want. And what I do is I typically dilute the vinegar with a little bit of water so that you don't get these pockets of vinegar in the dough. So I start off with a couple of tablespoons into the vinegar and press the liquid into the dough. Notice how I'm using a spatula and kind of just tossing the flour with the water. I'm not really mixing it, but I'm really pressing the water into the dough so that it picks up the moisture. Now there is a bit of imprecision here into how much water you should add. Now remember, I am making a double crust dough, so that calls for approximately 3.5 to 4.5 tablespoons of ice cold water. And the reason that we get a range of water that we need to add to the dough is because there are variables that affect how much water the dough takes in. For instance, it could be approximately how much flour you added to your dough. It could be the humidity of the environment in which you make the dough, things like that. And so when you stick your hand down, you're just looking for a dough that feels very damp and comes together very easily. Now you're going to want to err on making the dough too damp over too dry. And the reason is because when we're rolling this out on a floured surface, it's much easier to add flour than it is to add water. So I always err on the side of making a dough that feels a little bit too sticky to roll out, but once we put it onto the floured surface, it becomes a little bit more manageable. Take 2 pieces of saran wrap and put them onto your countertop, and then divide the dough into 2 equal parts. Just think ahead. The shape of your dough that you put it into now is going to help you when you roll it out. So if we're making a standard pie that's in a 9-inch round pie dish, we're going to want to flatten this into a disc, a circular flat shape. If we were making rectangular pies, which are actually really cute nowadays, we're going to want to shape this into more of a square shape so that when we roll it out, it's a little bit easier. Also, when I prepare my dough for resting in the refrigerator, I like to do this folding step. So what I do is fold it into thirds one direction and then fold that piece into thirds before I flatten it into a disc. Allowing your all butter pie crust to rest in the refrigerator for at least 1 hour is very important because it allows all of the moisture from the water to soak into the flour and give you a more even crust. Pie dough will keep in the refrigerator for up to a week or in the freezer for up to a month. Just make sure that if you do put it in the freezer to put it inside a zip top bag that is freezer safe so it doesn't inherit any of the smells from your freezer. Just make sure that you move your freezer dough into the refrigerator the day before you plan to make the pie so that it has time to thaw out. There you go, all butter pie crust completely made by hand. Happy baking and thanks for watching.